I'm Adnan Mahmutovic, and this is Love and Its Discontents podcast. Today's guest doesn't need any introduction in my field of studies, the literary studies, but I just want to tell you how honored I am to welcome Professor Mieke Bal. She's a Dutch cultural theorist and video artist. She's the author of 46 books, she tells me, which is a huge number, on topics such as biblical, classical antiquity, 17th century, modern art, contemporary literature, feminism, mental illness, and migratory culture. Now, in my field of studies, her work on narratology was indispensable. I mean, something all graduate students had to engage with. But today we will talk about her book, Loving Yusuf, which is a book that I don't actually remember how I found it. If it was by accident or if it was when I was looking for material for a course that I was putting together for my department. And I want to tell this story just briefly because it's really important, I think. So I finished my PhD in 2010, and I got the green light from the department to create a new course. And I wanted to do a course called Love and Its Discontents. So this is the course that has been running here for some 13 years. My favorite course, I love it so much, and I wanted to teach the story of Joseph, which was one of my absolute favorite stories from the Bible and the Quran. And then I read Loving Yusuf, and it was, if I can say, a page turner. Which is a little bit unusual, I think, for academic books. I couldn't put it down. It was a little bit like that. It was almost like reading some crime fiction or something really, really so exciting. I just couldn't put it down. And one thing that I admired so much was the way you put yourself into it. And I don't mean just that you said what this story meant for you and that is some kind of a preface, but rather throughout the entire book, every segment of it contains so much of yourself, whether you speak of the story, whether you analyze the story or the conceptual apparatus, the methodology. There is always this aura of you throughout it, and that was so amazing, so mesmerizing. I just loved it so much. So it's not something that we academics can do often, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I was thinking that if we could start with, because in this book you want to analyze the story of Joseph, but you also want to make other contributions. And one of the things that spoke to me personally so much, and this is why I want to start with the methodology, it's also important for our listeners to know how you approach the story. Was as someone who is a European Muslim, someone who has survived ethnic cleansing and genocide, those kinds of things, a migrant, and living in a time where we talk so much about fundamentalism. One of the things that you do, and you want to clearly distinguish between literalism and fundamentalism. And you say those are opposing forces, and I appreciated that so much. The way you and instinctively I felt this is absolutely right. This is exactly how I see the danger of fundamentalism. Maybe you could say something about that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's a really good beginning. The difference between literalism is taking the text or the image very seriously, and every word counts, and where it stands, what in the syntagm, all that is very important, but what it means is not so fixed. And so fundamentalism would be fixing the meaning instead of respecting the text. And I think respect for the text, in fact, requires that the meaning gets to float, that the meaning can be adapted to the situation, to the reader, where the reader comes from, etc. And that's, for me, in the story, I mean, we'll get to that, but for me, in the story, the importance was that in the biblical text, the bad woman situation is projected on the Egyptian culture, but in the Quran, that is where it is set. So that's a very different context, very different situation, framing of the story, and that's how it's possible that, to the astonishment of many of my students, the Quran version has this incredibly, I would almost say, feminist version in the story of the knives and the blood and the woman's way of making other people understand her pain. And I thought that was so incredible and such a discovery. It's also why I call the book Loving Yusuf and not Joseph, because Yusuf is the way my Arab friends pronounce it. And of course, my best Arab friend called his first son Yusuf after this book.
That's amazing. So, calling someone by an academic book, that's really amazing. I love that.
Yeah, I do too. And this friend became a friend simply because he was my neighbor. And I saw him with his arm in a cast, and I said, "What happened to you?" And I said, "Oh, long story." And I said, "Well, come in, have a drink." "Well, I don't drink." "Well, a glass of water, and tell me your story." And then he told the story of exploitation in the building and industry, and how he had fallen in the middle of the night because he never slept. He was studying during the day and working during the night. So he never had enough time to sleep, and that's how he broke his I think it was his hand. Yeah, it was his hand. And so we became best friends, and this is 20 years ago.
Oh, that is so lovely. I just love that that we had this anecdote now, because I feel that these kinds of intimacies that arise from these kinds of encounters across any cultural, ideological borders are so beautiful. I've had those experiences myself, and I mean, reading your book and someone reading my stories, for instance, in let's say in America, and connecting at such a deep kind of intimate level is a miracle. It's really something that I feel is anti-fundamentalist.
Yeah, it is. But it should not be a miracle. It should be normal, common. There is no reason why those boundaries exist. There's no reason.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It is the fact that, in a sense, this kind of narrow fundamentalist view tells us, those borders should matter so much. But when you see that they don't, that they're porous, that the meaning flows between them and we connect, is exactly what proves them wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And I think so. It's not, I wouldn't call it a miracle. I would say it's something that is unjustifiedly exceptional. And it shouldn't be. It should be normal.
That's right. Yes, absolutely. That's what how we should see it. I've when in a sense, like if we go straight to the concept of love, and see, this is connected to what you just said about the context, how when we read, and in a sense the fundamentalist reading is the imposition of an ideological position on a text, which is then filtered through that position, and then you distinguish between stylistic and narratological and ideological kinds of readings. And for me, I want us to kind of try and define love or establish some kind of a ground for the reading. And I was thinking of the part in your book where you talk about 3 different grounds. The third ground you call socio-cultural habit. And this is where you say something which I've been telling my students a lot about, and just generally thinking about this fact. You're right. If English uses the word love interchangeably for sexual passion, parental attachment, and polite but informal friendliness to strangers, this leads English speakers into interpretive directions that may be utterly strange, even dangerous or immoral, to speakers of languages where such notions are attached to different words. So in a sense, if we in English we use the word love, we can say I love coffee, and I love my mom, and I love my wife or children, I love God. I mean, that's a huge span of things that you just all put the one concept, which does create some problems, and especially when we read other works from other cultures, different times, when that kind of interpretation is not operative. So with that in mind, can we try and define love?
That's a tough one. I'm not even sure I want to, but I do agree with the critique of this sort of widely used word love. I even get messages from Vimeo, from technology, and it says love Vimeo. Come on, there's no love with Vimeo. That makes no sense. But for me, love should be something that turns the larger community, all the strangers that you see and that you don't know, into personal contact. And then you go towards love or not. It can become a personal contact that doesn't work, if you don't like the person, in fact, but it can also be something that is important as an enrichment of your own life. And this happened with that friend, that Arab friend, who became a very good friend, simply because he had an accident. And then it turned out that he was my neighbor, and he became a friend, and I went to see his family, I went to his wedding, so we became best friends, as we say. Now, a best friend, that comes close to love. Not love in the sexual sense, and I think for me that sexual sense of love is already an abusive use of it, because it doesn't mean anything. It's just sex. Call it what it is. It's sex. But there are really interesting cases where the word love has a strange linguistic specificity. And this is the case in French, for example, where love is masculine in the singular and plural in the feminine, feminine in the plural. Donc, so you have un grand amour. Moi, comme femme, j'ai un grand amour. Et le type avec qui j'ai cette relation amoureuse, il a des amours clandestines dans toutes les villes. Et donc, c'est resté comme ça depuis le début du développement de la langue, masculine in the singular, feminine in the plural. Now, that says something about ideology in language. N'est-ce pas? Sorry. Yeah. And I think that is a really good instance to understand how such a word as love is, you have to be sort of precise with it. I love someone. I'm not going to say I love you because I don't know you, but I love, my children. I love my partner. I love a lot of people as friends. That can be a love. Friendship can be a love. But it's not the same as all those different meanings and uses. That's bullshit.
Indeed. I agree. Especially, I didn't know that even AI can now send you these love letters. That's new to me. I haven't had that experience. Love from YouTube or Twitter or something like that. Yeah, but I can see how that ideology works. And this is important for us, like when we now want to kind of analyze the story of Joseph, that I want us to distinguish between at least three different kinds of love, and how they kind of affect each other. Of course, the focus will be on Joseph and Potiphar's wife, but I want us to talk also about the parental love before Joseph comes to Egypt, and also this kind of vertical relationship to God, that kind of love to God, or that they have, that he has and his father has. So before we begin with that, do you think you could give us the plot of the story?
Well, yeah. Joseph has been brought to Egypt, sold into Egypt, and there he becomes the steward of the house because he's so capable, he's so good in what he does, and honest, and everybody loves him. Then this woman who is allegedly the wife of Potiphar, we don't know what wife means in that context, by the way. We don't know how many wives were there or how, but anyway, there is this woman called Potiphar's wife. And Thomas Mann is brave enough to give her a name. And he calls her Mut, M-A-N-T. And Mut in German means courage. So that is already interesting for a German writer who is Jewish and had to flee from the Nazis to give this character a name. Anyway, the woman is enamored, to use a verb, of Joseph. She's attracted by him. I think it's a sexual attraction, and she wants to sleep with him. And she doesn't manage it because he refuses. And he refuses. There are different reasons. There's always this why question. Why does he refuse? Well, maybe he didn't like her. Maybe he didn't want to abuse his boss, the master of the house. And maybe he thought that it wouldn't be good in the eyes of God. That's not a concept that I know well, but he mentions it. And so he says no, and then the woman grabs his coat. And that coat is very significant in the story because before, when Joseph was the favorite son of his father, the father gave him a multicolored coat, a beautiful coat. And when the brothers are so jealous that they put him in a pit and then sell him to the Egyptians, they take that coat, smear it with animal blood, and say to their father, he must have been eaten by wild animals. And the father is in mourning, and because he loved him so much. But the coat then comes back in the story when the Potiphar's wife grabs his coat as evidence that he tried to seduce her or to rape her. And the one really nasty element in the biblical story is that she then calls on the staff of the house and said, he, meaning Potiphar, wanted to mock me by mock us all by appointing this stranger to be the boss in the house. So there is not only the sexually abusive, the abuse of her husband, there is also this class issue. And I think that is a very important issue. And that's it. Said he wanted to mock us all because we are the servants in the house. And first of all, she's not, but the other people are. But that's a very nasty way of setting up the staff against the master by a class issue. And I think that is also very, very significant and very often an issue in the hostility against foreigners and specifically Islam Muslims. That people say, oh, you know, they're, they're just servants. We can abuse them. And I think in that sense, the story has this other relevance still. The story has the feminist issue, but it also has this class issue that is still relevant in the whole situation of multicultural societies.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's why the story is still kind of resonant. It's so there's so many things to even identify with. Even if we talk about that kind of level of reading with identification, of course it goes much deeper, but it really functions on multiple levels. In that way. As you said before, Joseph comes to Egypt. We have a very interesting situation in the family. He is the beloved son of Jacob, or Israel. So he is the proto-father. The people will be called after him, the people of Israel. So he is that, and then Joseph. He loves Joseph so much, as you say. We have you mentioned the coat that he gives him the coat, and then that becomes a symbol of later on when he is blind. Joseph will send, I think, his shirt so that the father can smell him or recognize that he is alive or something like that. So obviously we have a strong loving relationship of filial love, the parental love, what Plato would call the filial love between parents and children.
Yes.
And how important do you think it is that the story establishes that love for the later story, for instance?
Yeah. Well, the position of Joseph with his father is also a way of announcing the development of the people in different tribes and different. So that is important. And the parental filial love is also a narrative device to establish the possibility of what the brothers do. They're jealous because they don't have that love. They do mischief, they do crime, and they try to put him in the pit, and then they even want to kill him, but then there's one who says, don't kill him, let's sell him, that gives us some money. Capitalism is never far away. And he is also, he doesn't become the father of the people. That remains Jacob Israel. He is the father of the different people. Joseph is an exceptional character because he is sent away. He's sold away, and he goes to a different culture, which could also be seen as a very nice crossing of borders. Because even if the woman is trying to ridicule her husband by saying he brought us this Hebrew guy, like trying to establish anti-Semitism, the fact that it is set in Egypt and that the bad woman is of the foreign culture for the Hebrews is a very important issue, and it makes it difficult to maintain that there is only one Jewish people. This idea that Jacob is the father of all the tribes is a little problematic in view of that version of that story. And that has not been seen. Even this great scholar that I cite all the time, Kugel, he has not seen how this story is also ethnically, ideologically, class-wise, a very problematic story in the Hebrew version. And then in the Quran version, it's very different. And for me, that was, of course, I read the story of Joseph first, then I read the big novel of Thomas Mann, and I thought, where did he get that? The story of the knives and the blood, and it's just in the Quran, just there. Clearly, explicitly, it's in the Quran. So, what does that say about the different cultures where the story functions? And I thought that was a very interesting find. I was so thrilled when I discovered that Thomas Mann has taken, in the time that the Jews were persecuted by the Nazis, that's the time that he did this, to give an argument for ethnic openness. And the Jews have the right to be different, and so do the Muslims. And I think that's really important. That keeps the story actual.
Absolutely, and that was exactly what I was reacting to as well. You know, reading it, as I said, in the context of Europe and the war in the Balkans, the connection between us and the Jews in World War II is constantly established, and the way we speak about the atrocities and how we and the connections between peoples and so on. So I think that was so beautiful that he did this, especially in that time, as you say.
Yeah.
There is that sense of the travel and the porosity of borders, and the fact that you become your best self in a completely different place from the conditions that are all against you. So that is in part also what he's thinking about, that Joseph really is sinking so low and then rises up so high, and that those contrasts are what make him what he is. What's interesting in all that is the fact that and this is why I like your title so much, because you don't say it's not the love of Joseph or love of Yusuf, it's loving. So love here is a verb, it's an action, it's something you do, and it gives you a sense of time, a long stretch of time. It's a continuum, rather than just like this something set, right?
Yeah, right. So love is, we use love as a noun, but it's a verb.
I would agree with that. Yes, I think the action itself in all these scenes, in all the entire story, you have to work for it somehow. You have to kind of fight for it. You have to make sure that you are loving rather than in love with. It's not a state. Right. It's
no.
Yeah, I don't want to say it's a job, but you know what I mean. It's an effort.
It's something to do. Yeah.
It's something to do. Yes, it is something to do, and this is why I think there is an interesting contrast in the story, that the fact that wherever Joseph goes, people fall in love with him. From the father, of course, his brothers hated him, but the question is if they really hated him, or if it was just that the jealousy because the father loved him so much trumped their love for Joseph. Right. But from the father, when he comes to Egypt and Potiphar loves him so much, and you also speak about the way they say, maybe we want to adopt him. I mean, they love him so much. He's just a servant, as you say. He's a slave. He's sold to them. So they own him. But this instinct that they want to adopt him shows some kind of a love that they feel for him.
Yes.
So wherever he goes, it's really interesting that he is abused, but at the same time loved.
Yes. And the one because of the other. She abuses him because she loves him, and he doesn't love her back. And I don't know if he found her repulsive, he found her imposing. He just didn't want to go and do something bad, and that would be bad to sleep with her, to have sex with her. So it's not about love, but about sex. And the woman, I think, is more really in love with him, loves him, but it's also very sexual, very much about her attraction to him. I just made a film in which I used the story in the Rembrandt etching in the beginning of the film. And the woman grabs the coat, his jacket, and he runs away, and that's the beginning of his pedigree through Europe as a foreigner. So this is my contemporary version of the Joseph story in depicting foreigners, refugees, and showing that we don't look at them. This is the visual thing. I'm not answering your question here, but he gets lost. So I have a refugee, someone playing the refugee, and he is sort of lost, lonely in the crowd, because in the city there are lots of people, but nobody looks at him. And so the whole film, it's a short film, but the whole film, you see the guy trying to make contact and nobody looks at him. And this is the situation that needs to change. There's sort of ignoring foreigners and taking them to be non-existent, which makes them emotionally non-existing. And that is a very cruel way of dealing with people who in fact enrich our culture. I've made that argument in another film project, that the foreigners enrich our culture. They make it much more interesting, much more challenging, much more, colorful, as we say. And that is not appreciated. They consider it dirty instead of colorful and nice.
Instead of the colorful coat, I agree with you, because the story of Joseph, it seems to be like this proto-story of the foreigner that is valuable, that is lovable, and
Right.
That's why it's kind of compelling. Like it establishes this like thousands of years ago. Like this is how you treat foreigners, and it will be good for you.
Yeah.
Whereas
It's an enrichment.
the part. Indeed, and in Joseph's case, it's literal enrichment, because he boosts the economy of Egypt. So
That too.
it's
That
that,
too,
yeah.
yes.
But he's, as you say,
Yes.
treated. He's a slave, and he's treated as a foreigner. There is a little bit of a racist slur, anti-Semitism there, obviously, and well. So they say, it goes hand in hand. This kind of love for him. He's lovable, and yet. Yeah, they abuse him exactly because of that, because he won't return that love somehow. When it comes to the context and the fact that we what we mean by love, two things that I admired in your analysis was the fact that you insist on the fact that the woman, loves Joseph rather than. When I speak to my students, they say, well, it's just sexual. And I love that you insist on that she is suffering and she is punished for loving him. So the sexual attraction is there, and it's clearly distinguished from that. But you insist that no, she also loves him genuinely, and I think that's a very deep reading that is there in the story, but people miss because they focus on that kind of surface of the sexual desire versus a virtuous man.
Yeah. So it's all about, this is the thing. It's all sort of almost Christian values. Sex is bad. And so he resists that because he wants to be a good guy. And that's true, he wants to be a good guy. He doesn't want to abuse his boss, and he even thinks of God. But he is simply a good guy, but that doesn't make her a bad woman. And I think that this whole story is meant to make us all think that women are bad and dangerous. And this is the way, and this in the Hebrew version especially. And that's why I was so taken by the Quranic version with that end story, where it is not about her being bad. It's about her conveying to her friends what love means, that she is loving him, and they all are so taken by his beauty that they cut themselves. And it's like a metaphor also of defloration. It's all sorts of ways it has meaning. But it is a very powerful way of staging sympathy, suffering with their friend. And that makes her not a bad woman, but on the contrary, it makes her, someone that you want to suffer with, that you have compassion for. And that is a value that is much more important than being, resisting sex because sex is bad, which is what the story is supposed to mean in a sort of Christian context, and probably Hebrew, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And as you show, it's quite weird that there is a scene where she calls her friends, ladies from the town, to actually siege it, because there's gossip about that.
Yes.
And the interesting thing about the gossip is, of course, that it's not about sex at all, because she, as a mistress, as the master, has a right to his body. In any slave culture, you have or a culture that has slaves, the masters have right to everything that slaves offer. So in that way, there we can see a difference in the relationship to or how they understand sexuality. That it's not really the sex that's the issue, rather the fact that he refused her. And as they say, the Hebrew boy refused her. So it's again this. So the slave boy refused his master. So that's the shame that she's exposed to. Not that she, even the husband doesn't react so much to her wanting to have sex with the boy. I mean, this again another weird thing that we would say. Okay, well, why isn't he even jealous? Maybe she's had lots of lovers. Maybe it's just a part of the culture. And is the fact that he refused her that is a problem, and then she wants to justify loving him or being attracted to him, to them, to show that, okay, this is why.
Yeah. So she exposes her friends, the women in the town, to that attraction, and so that they understand what she's going through, and that the being refused in your loving is creates suffering, produces suffering, and so they all suffer, literally, because they're in pain. It's like oranges in blood that's going to hurt very badly. The acid of oranges in their open wounds is going to hurt very badly. And that is the suffering with her. And they accept it. They don't blame her. They just say, well, hey, what do you want? This guy is too beautiful. So they don't blame her for that accident at all.
I love how she stages it. It's just so clever the way she does it. Really, it's not I'm explaining something to you. I'm showing it, and that's something you say about the story. It's showing things rather than telling you things.
Yeah. No, it's amazing how smart she was. Much smarter than in the Hebrew version, with this silly code thing. She is really explaining to the people who gossip about her, don't gossip because you would do the same thing. And that's what happens, in fact. Because then in the end, the women don't blame her, but they don't blame Joseph either. He said, of course, this guy is too beautiful. And so it's sort of natural that they hurt themselves. They don't complain. They just want to have to vindicate her attraction to him, her love, her loving.
And this is, I think, where you make such a huge contribution by pointing out that the insertion of this scene, which, in a sense, if the theological point has already been made, then there is no reason to have a scene where she's vindicated at all. There is no reason to have something like that, and yet it is there, which
it is there. Yes,
creates a shift.
And for me, that's an important thing. Yeah, it's an important point about the Quran, because of course there are very bad stories in the Quran, as there are in the Hebrew Bible, but this is a feminist episode. We would call it today a feminist episode. The women go with her, understand her, sympathize, literally, and that would be a feminist issue. And you're right that Joseph has the reputation of being the first migrant or the first refugee. I was at a conference on Joseph last year, and that was the statement was, he was the first migrant, the first refugee. I wouldn't say the first migrant, because people were all migrating at the time, but the first who had to escape, and he was sold as a slave and escaped through being good. That was his saving grace. And I think that is. So I have to say that with everything that the Christians and Jews think about the Islam and the Quran, they should read this story. And then they would understand a little better that not everything is sexist.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And for me, it's I wonder if you can say something about this, the fact that, as you said, it's not so clear why Joseph refuses, as Thomas Mann named her Mut. She has many names in different cultures, and I like that you chose that one, I think, for your book. The interesting thing here is that he comes to Egypt, which is an entirely different culture. This is why I mentioned this sexual politics in Egypt, which is clear in that scene, that they have a completely different notion of what is okay, what's not okay, what they blame each other for. So maybe he refuses her because he doesn't want to hurt his, the new father, Potiphar, the man who wanted to adopt him, the love of him, or her as well as, in a sense, his master, his mistress. And then there is, of course, the religious bit, that he doesn't want to sin against God, which means that, in a sense, that he brings his religion to a place where it doesn't apply at all. So his ethical code, his moral code, is completely different. Let's say in relationship to sex, or it could be anything else, and he sticks to that code. He really is firm in that belief, which means that he's one single isolated migrant, where he's the only one who has that faith and believes that something is, for instance, sin, whereas no one else does it. So that in itself has, that migrant element, a migrant having a different faith in another place, adapting or not adapting. He's really not adapting, in a sense, when it comes to his ethos, right?
No, he brings his own values with him. And that is also important in view of how we think about migrants. They have ideas, they have conceptions of what is good and what is bad, the values, and all you can do is respect that, because if you don't, you are enslaving people. If you take people's values away, you are in fact enslaving them, and that is not what this story is advocating. So it is a bit mysterious why he refuses her. You can speculate. Maybe she was much older than he, maybe she wasn't so attractive, but maybe simply because you don't sleep with the wife of your boss, and then it's a sin against God. So in what way would it be a sin against God? Well, that's up to him. That's really up to him to decide that, and he does.
That's right.
And he does.
What he's learned, obviously. Do you think that there is, in his mind, a hierarchy of loves, that even if he loves the woman, even he loves Potiphar, and he loves God, that he has a sense that, well, one love trumps another, one love stands above another, so I first need to honor God, and then maybe Potiphar, and then the wife, then my love for her, or do you think that the fact that he conceives of different kinds of love, and that there is a hierarchy to them in his mind, what structures it all?
Yeah, that is not so clear to me, because I think he considers it a sin for God. But he first says, your husband gave me the power in this house, and it would be an abuse of that power if I did this. So this is a very logical sort of social issue. And then in the biblical story, it's the love of the father that remains. And in the Thomas Mann novel also, the father starts to haunt him, and it comes back. Have you read the novel, the Thomas Mann? It's an incredible. It's an incredible novel, especially if you think of the time when he wrote it. And I think that he is claiming, and he actually wrote that he was vindicating the woman. And I think that vindication was a way of vindicating all the Jews who were suffering from the Nazis at that time. And the Jews have the right to have different values. Joseph has different values. And that is the most personal property that a person can have, to have values. And everyone does. Even the most bad criminals have their own values, like money or whatever. Having values is a human right. And so he's claiming his human status. Even if the women say that's not a human being, he's too beautiful for that, but he claims his own human human nature. And the nature of his as a human is to have values, and the values include, I don't know if it's a love of God or a respect for God's interdictions, or if it's the power of his boss, his owner, who has been so kind to him and all that. Those are his values. And so it's nothing to do, there is never a word about that he doesn't like the look of this woman. That could be a reason, but that's never said. There's no pronouncement of her age, there's no pronouncement of her beauty or not beauty. That's not mentioned.
Indeed, it's not a part of the story. It's not the beautiful seductress or the nasty. Those kinds of details are excluded, whereas some details are included. I just find the thing what you said about Thomas Mann so fascinating. That the way he read the story to say something about the Jews in that time. It resonates so much, where you find the source for your inspiration and your values, and to actually stay strong. Because she is all too human in a sense. Whereas for Joseph, this is something that I think is really interesting. This contrast between, well, him as just another guy and an angel. So the question is, why is he so, for instance, so attractive and so lovable? Why are people attracted to him? In the Quranic stories, the women say that well, in the Bible as well, he is the most beautiful man like ever. So that's kind of very visual. But when the women in the Quran say that he is like an angel, there is an additional kind of element to it. It's not just the looks, it's the spiritual aura of his or something like that. So for me, I'm almost thinking that he doesn't even need to be beautiful to be attractive, to be perceived as, you see what I mean? I always ask my students, well, what does he look like? Is he like Brad Pitt, or what? How would you imagine him visually? I mean, how beautiful can you actually be so that people would cut their hands? But is it really about that kind of a beauty, or is it something else? What is so attractive about him?
Yeah. You want me to answer that? I have no idea. I never met him. My thought, of course, is that the fact that he was his father's favorite son, which isn't explained, he was one of the later ones, but not the very last one. That preference of his father is never explained, but once that's put down narratively, the jealousy of the brothers start to cook. It boils over. They are so jealous that they want to kill him. And there's only one who says, no, let's not do that. But the jealousy is the kind of jealousy that in a love relationship, if your partner has a lot of lovers, you could have that jealousy, but that's not exactly the same kind of jealousy. It is the fact that one of them gets the preference, and that preference is the source of the jealousy, not the fact that that she has lovers or whatever. The fact that he is the preferred one, and that probably makes him beautiful, makes him attractive. That he is, he's put down as attractive by his father. He's fixed as attractive. Doesn't matter whether he's beautiful or not. Although everybody says it, they say that he's beautiful. They don't say anything about her looks. They only talk about his beauty. And that beauty could be spiritual beauty, or it could be anything, like a nice smile. You have people who have a very yeah, attractive way of looking at other people. And that is a kind of beauty. Whether they're, yeah, 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 yeah.
Once a student of mine proposed a theory here, exactly because the the excess of this beauty is so great that you just can't imagine it, and you can't visualize it. Really, it's beyond visualization. That's a thing. And he proposed that, exactly as you say, because he was chosen by his father, he was singled out as special, that more lovable than others. But also that he is chosen by God. So the very fact that he is the chosen one for this, to be the protagonist of this story, is also what affects them. That it kind of shines through him that he is chosen by God, and this is why. This is how a student of mine explained it. This is why they see him as an angel. It's not. It's really the love of God that kind of seeps through him. He could be even ugly, visually speaking, or just a kind of a regular guy like anyone else. But it's that kind of, at least in his worldview, the love of God being the chosen one for this, that makes him so attractive.
Yeah, true. So the father loves him, then God loves him, and the woman loves him. And it's only the woman's love that he has to reject. He could have rejected his father. He could have said, "You should love my brothers as much as you love me." He could have done that. He didn't.
That's true. There is, when I do this with my students, I ask them to dramatize the story, so to act, so to take different characters and act. And when they do that, what comes across is this a really interesting way the stories, the multiple stories create characterization. So it becomes almost like a modern soap opera. It's a little bit, characters can become a little bit of caricatures and a little bit silly. And Joseph, sometimes students interpret him as a little bit conceited, a little bit kind of full of himself. I'm the chosen one, and so on. So he's not, as you say, he's not rejecting the father and say, "Love my brothers as well." He's a little bit kind of naive about his beauty, about his attractiveness. Like, I don't know, people love me, I don't know why. So that's something that they react to, I think.
No, when I am casting for a film, I'm looking for actors. The last film I made, I lost the actor I had in mind, and so I had to go hunting for one. And I just saw someone. And, I got an opportunity to talk with him, and I said, "Could you sit down and can we talk? Have you ever been for a camera?" "No, never." "Would you like to?" "Oh, yeah, interesting." But the reason I liked this guy so much was because he had this incredibly open, smiley face. And I said, "But you have a problem here, because you're supposed to be a lonely migrant. And so you cannot be so cheerful. Are you able to look sad?" And I said, "Well, I can try." And he actually does a great job. He does a great job, and he's just the ideal figure for the role.
Oh, that's so lovely. this touches me so deep because when I wrote my stories about refugees, I realized that they were also very humorous. I thought I was writing sad stories about sad refugees, but it turned out I was writing, sad stories about funny refugees and funny stories about sad refugees.
Yeah, right.
So they were like resisting that kind of.
Yeah. No, the thing about making art, writing stories or making films, is resisting the stereotypical, resisting all the stereotypes. Everything people say about foreigners, about refugees, about, give another image, make it different.
Indeed, and the fact that how do we resist stereotypes? And I think that the answer that you give in your book is by giving multiple versions of the same story, or because here what you do is you take on the Hebrew version of the Joseph story, the Quranic one, Thomas Mann, Rembrandt. You take all these different interpretations and put them together and say they each has to give something else. So each has a core that is valuable to look at, and this kind of multiplicity of it's not like we need to establish which story is the absolute, authoritative version. Rather, all these stories contribute to the truth of this great narrative.
Yeah. No, absolutely. The other attitude would be fundamentalist, and what we do is constantly picking up a new version, a different version, and then looking at literally at the science. What does it do? What does it say? And that makes it so creative. That makes it creative.
Yes, and this is in a sense exactly what is meant by loving Yusuf, is taking words, taking stories seriously, and not as ideological tools or vehicles for ideological agendas.
Yeah. No, the ideological, taking it as ideological directions is abusive of the text, of the art. It's an abuse of art. Art is not meant to be the preacher on the Sunday telling us how to behave. Art is meant to make us think. Not about what specifically, but in general. Think harder. And then you can maybe change your mind about your stereotypes. I think art is the best tool against stereotypes if we resist the tendency to see it as a repetition of what we already know, which is what often happens in art classes.
That is so beautifully put. Mieke, this was really wonderful. I loved so much talking to you. I know I've used the word love so much so far. I just can't express my gratitude in any other way. This has been a dream. I've been wanted to talk to you about this book and generally for such a long time. I mean, especially the fact that I've been running this course for 13 years with my students, and now I wanted to also transfer it into some kind of a podcast for a broader audience and expose people to what I do in class and to the great thinkers that have shaped me. So thank you so much for today, and bless you.
Well, thank you for your hospitality, and I enjoyed the conversation.